And I'm going to give you just a little tiny, weensy bit of hope. Last week, they appointed a head of the CDC, who is a woman, who actually is a public health professional.
Erica Schwartz.
Was actually a former deputy surgeon general, who is respected in the field, and who is a woman of color, who is the least Trumpy nomination they've made anywhere, and is a good pick. To me, that's a sign that they're running scared.
I'm Joanna Coles. This is the Daily Beast podcast, and there is full panic in the White House. At one point, apparently, according to a news story in the Wall Street Journal, Trump was led out of the Situation Room because he couldn't be there. He was screaming so much. Obviously under pressure, Susie Wiles is having an offsite today to reassure Republican candidates and Republican congresspeople that there is a future. Well, is there a future? And Kash Patel, well, David Rothkopf has been talking to his sources at the FBI and in the intelligence community, and he will be giving us further details on what the hell is going on with this current cabinet. So, no time to waste. And just a reminder before we get into it with David Rothkopf, you can join the Daily Beast community as a friend of the Beast. You get a discount on the subscription to our website. You also get early and exclusive content, video content. So it's really worth doing, and it's a real way to support independent media so we can bring you the conversations that we do. David Rothkopf!
Joanna!
Help! Help!
It's Monday. It's Monday. You should be full of energy and excited. It's a new week, new exciting things, good news happening all over across America.
So Susie Wiles is having an offsite today for frustrated Republicans. What can they have to talk about? What can they have to talk about? Oh, wait, the war, tariffs, ICE, everything, the Epstein files, losing the midterms. David, what's happening? I know you've been speaking to your insider sources at the intelligence agencies, and you've got more information on Kash Patel. I'm so excited to talk about him. Should we, however, kick off with the war and the cargo ship that we've just blown a hole in their engine room?
What? Look, I mean, we can kick off wherever you want. You want to kick off with the offsite? I mean, because she's having an offsite. And it's a little bit like that meme of the dog sitting in the room surrounded by fires saying, everything's fine. Because, that's basically where they're going to end up. She's going to be like, okay, we've got this under control. And anybody who's, sentient and has not completely, sold, off all of their kind of perceptive powers realizes that everything, as you said, is going wrong. The war is going wrong. The economy is going wrong. Political polling is going wrong. The stories of each one of the members of this clown car cabinet are just going absolutely crazy, as we'll talk about later. Trump himself is going nuts. I thought the most interesting story of the whole weekend, actually, was the story in the Wall Street Journal where they said, when they were trying to rescue the flyer in Iran,
the soldier that had been the airman who'd been shot down. When you say flyer, yeah. I think the technical term is airman.
What?
The flyer. What is a flyer?
A flyer. That's what flyers they call it. I have a pilot's license, Joanna.
Oh, you do? All right. And you're called a flyer? Why isn't it called a flyer's license? You and Lauren Sanchez.
Oh my God. Yeah. You see all my Botox and my...
Someone sent me a note today saying she looks practically amphibious now.
That's very cruel, and we should not be commenting on the appearance of women. That's a choice she's making. She's an adult woman. We should be supportive. But
so true.
Let's go
to the airman,
to the flyer who was being rescued, and the president, the commander-in-chief, was not allowed in the room by the generals who were overseeing this sensitive operation because they, or the people close to Trump, thought he would go nuts because he had apparently spent the whole day screaming that this was going to be like Jimmy Carter and Desert One, and it was a disaster, and it would look bad for him. Not, of course, caring much about the airmen.
Right,
flying.
wouldn't look great for the airmen either.
No, would have, the guy was like scrambling for his life, right? But the point is, Trump is so unfit to serve as commander-in-chief that they're not even letting him in the room at the most sensitive moments because they know he's nuts. And that's going to be the underlying theme of, Susie Weil. Like, how do we get for 2.5 more years with a president who's going completely bonkers every single day?
Well,
and she'll be like, oh yeah, we've got this all under control. Don't worry about a thing. But of course, that's all they can do is worry. The war right now is disapproved of by 2/3 of Americans, and the other 1/3 either didn't understand the question or they're lying.
They didn't understand the question. Well, we still don't know, as John Bolton pointed out over the weekend, why
there's a credible source.
Well, but at least he's been in the room with Trump, and his descriptions of what it's like being in the Situation Room with Trump are fascinating, because he said he hated it. He felt very uncomfortable because the room was full of people who knew more than he did. He'd never been in a room where a president looked as if he was feeling more uncomfortable, which I thought was that Trump is feeling uncomfortable, and obviously he's freaking out because this war isn't what he thought it was going to be, which is you're in and you're out like they got in Venezuela.
Well, look, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who've been in the room with Trump, and they've had the same feeling. Anytime he thinks there is an expert who might actually contradict him, he gets uncomfortable. Right? He is allergic to people who do not immediately fall to their knees in front of him and say, oh my God, you're incredible. I've never seen a red tie that long. And, John Bolton is absolutely right about that. Although he's wrong about most things. John Bolton is a really bad guy. One of the most senior people in our State Department, who later went on to be senior person in other jobs, once said to me, well, most people in the government worry about somebody stabbing you in the back. John Bolton will stab you in the chest. He's just super combative. But having said, and by the way, he also thinks that what Trump should do during this war is double down. He's actually been saying Trump should, go harder at the Iranians. So,
well, he's always maintained that America should take Iran out as a state, right, and get rid of the leadership. What he is perceptive on is what it's like watching Trump having to make difficult decisions and be around people, as you say, who are experts. And his point is that Trump hasn't explained the war. So we referenced him because you said 1/3 of the people either don't understand the question or they're lying about their disapproval of the war. And he said they just haven't sold the war to anybody. Nobody understands what we're in this for.
How are they going to sell the war, John? What are they going to do? Say, yes, we should be illegally attacking this country of 92 million people that has a 7,000-year-old civilization? When every single time we've tried to do this for the past 60 years in Vietnam or in Afghanistan or in Iraq, we have failed to produce the change that we seek because our military is not designed for it, and our people don't have the political will to say, yeah, we'll just go on and do this forever until the other side gives up. What John Bolton is missing out here is that we don't have the tools to achieve the goals he wants to achieve. He's got animus, but he doesn't have any idea how to manifest it into a constructive strategy. Trump doesn't either. Trump isn't, Bolton's given this 1,000 times more thought than Trump. But the Iranians are leaning back and they're going, okay, guys, bring it. Well, you don't have tools. You want to sink a cargo ship, as you said? What does sinking or shooting a cargo ship in the engine room do? Well, first of all, it's not a real big flex, right? Because it's a cargo ship. It's not firing back. Secondly, it's not really full of anything contrabandy. It's just a gesture. But what does it do? It pushes up the price of oil. We saw that. It pushes down the markets. We've seen that. And every time the price of oil goes up and the markets go down, who wins? Iran wins because Iran puts more pressure on Trump because Trump wants out of this thing. He does not want to look bad. It goes back to his thing with the fire airmen. He doesn't want to have egg on his face at the end of all of this. And the Iranians know all they have to do is lean back, and Trump will self-inflict wounds till the cows come home. And that works for them.
Well, what's fascinating as well is he can't stop himself. So he's truth socialing like mad. He's saying, oh, I'm sending everybody for talks in Islamabad. And then the Iranians say, well, we're not going to go. So where does that put him? I mean, it's the most remarkable. I can't think of a president who has communicated like this before and given the enemy so much ammunition.
Well, that's because other presidents communicate, and Trump improvises. He does free association. He literally is sitting there with a megaphone to the outside world on Truth Social, and anything that crosses his freaking mind goes out to the world.
He has no filter.
Does it support his agenda? No. Does it help him? Is he strategic? Does he keep quiet when he's supposed to keep quiet? No. Does he alienate his allies or give ammunition to his enemies? Yes. He is a mess. And I think that, we have these big discussions and, there are panel shows on Sunday mornings and senators and everybody gets together and they look very grave and they go, well, I think in Iran, this reminds me of the Suez Crisis of 1956. But the reality is the president's out of his freaking mind. His brain is porridge and, everybody's working around him, trying to figure out how to make him look like a president and not scream at them, and to sort of clean up on aisle Trump. And that's this whole administration, and that's what Susie Wiles is doing right now.
Clean
up on aisle Trump.
I love it. Clean up on aisle Trump. I know. I mean, people must be going in to talk to her just so panicked. And no matter how many slices of melon they put out in the corporate entertaining, which is obligatory when you have an offsite, horrid pieces of fruit that nobody wants to eat, but you do because you're so bored. And then there's always some sort of blueberries dotted around.
I think you're confessing from your scenes from your own life.
Yeah, totally. From many offsites, which, you always wanted to actually run away from the offsite. But I wouldn't want to be Susie Wiles today trying to calm a pack of Republicans who are worried that they're going to be run over in the midterms.
Well, can I tell you one of the things she's going to say to them? And I actually believe this is true. She's going to tell them the war is going to be over soon. That's the main thing everybody wants to hear. And Trump needs to have it over soon. And, the problem is because the Iranians know he needs to have it over soon. And because he has no credibility. They're playing it. But here's what's going to happen. They're going to do a deal. And the deal is going to look a little bit like this. The Iranians will promise not to produce a nuclear weapon ever. Trump will tout this as a great achievement, although that's been their position forever, and was actually their position in the JCPOA, which was the deal that they struck in 2015.
With Obama.
And he will also do what Obama did, which is he'll release some of their money. So for not changing the position, they'll get some money. Then, in terms of the Strait of Hormuz, they'll say, we declare it open, but we're going to have a toll. So before February 27th, it was open. There were no tolls. After February 27th, it'll be open. There'll be tolls. What'll happen? Iran will continue to do sort of what they did, but they'll make more money from it. It'll be a terrible deal. It will have cost us $1 to $2 billion a day, 13 U.S. lives so far, 3,500 Iranian lives so far, over 1,000 lives in Lebanon so far. And we will end up with nothing. But he'll declare victory, and everybody in the GOP will be so happy it's over, they will declare victory, and they will say, okay, let's change the subject. And so everything that Susie Wiles is doing today is about how do we change the subject so we can focus on this midterm election where we are going to get our asses handed to us because everything's going wrong and the president's nuts. And so that's, I think that's her message is war's going to be over soon. We'll focus on you. Don't worry about a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable. And I was thinking, I mean, today is the day. We're recording this on a Monday morning, and I want to come back to whether or not J.D. Vance is going to Pakistan. But today is the day that people apply for the tariffs that turn out to have been illegally taken by the president.
Can I correct you there?
Go ahead.
Today is the day corporations apply for getting repaid on the tariffs. Individuals can't get their money back. At least that's the way it's done.
Well,
so big corporations are going to get big checks, which they passed on the cost to you and me a long time ago. But we're not going to get our money back. They're going to get their money back.
Well, David, I was thinking more in Romneyan terms that corporations are people too. Corporations are people
not just
too.
Romney. Joanne, I'm so glad you brought that up. Because let me tell you something that most people don't understand. I know your favorite amendment to the Constitution is the 14th Amendment, right? Because that guarantees everybody equal protection under the law, not to mention birthright citizenship. But let's set that aside for a second. Since that amendment was passed in the wake of the Civil War, it has been used more times to establish and guarantee rights to corporations than to people. The equal protection under the law clause of the Constitution has been perverted to be a means by which corporations get more rights than we do. And because they can have more money and spend more money, Citizens United and everything else, they are now super citizens in America. And they're driving the cart. And so, I think we need to be a little careful about our language because we're not getting anything back.
No, it's true we're not. But David, if you actually think about it from the point of view of corporations employ people, right? And this has impacted all their employees. It's madness that we impose an import tax, which we call a tariff, which we, the customer, end up paying for. But companies also are impacted by this. This is how people get laid off. Companies go under. There are 3,000 companies at the moment suing the American government. Imagine the waste of taxpayers' money that goes into fielding all those legal cases.
Right.
Hold on. Let me finish. I just want to make my small point, which is now the government that, Doge roared through with its stupid chainsaw has to set up a new website and a ton of people to assess companies' claims for the monies that they paid, turns out, illegally, that Trump wasn't allowed to ask for. So the whole thing is a chaotic mess, and it's infuriating. I'm on the board of a couple of companies. It's absolutely infuriating to have to divert resources within a company to go after the money that you are owed, legally owed, because the president took illegal action by imposing random tariffs on countries that he didn't like. I've finished now.
Nice.
You may speak.
You're absolutely right. And that's absolutely true. But it's worse than that because the tariffs were not only illegal, they were inflationary and they caused higher prices for everybody. They were not only illegal, but they blew up the international trading system and a whole bunch of deals that we had made over decades and decades and decades, an international trading system that we led the design of. And so they essentially threw a spanner into the works of how trade works around the world. They undermined our credibility. They alienated our allies. They were used as a cudgel by the president to advance his own personal vendettas against different kinds of world leaders. These tariffs have been a disaster. And this is part of the problem of living in a moment of unparalleled chaos in U.S. history. The golden age of chaos is actually what we're in, right?
The golden age of chaos. Yep. That's a very good sum.
That's where we are. And what's the punchline? The punchline is we can't keep it all in our heads. We'll go, oh, the Iran war. Oh, the tariffs. Oh, RFK Jr. and the raccoon penis. Oh my God, they're trying to shut down democracy. They're getting rid of vaccines. They've, denied that climate change is happening in the world. They're attacking Canada. They want to attack Greenland.
Greenland. They're about to
going
take
after
over
NATO.
Cuba.
They love Putin. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Bibi Netanyahu's running our foreign policy. Oh my God. How do you keep this all straight in your mind other than listening to, Daily Beast podcast?
Well, I was just going to say, how do we keep it straight? We invite David Rothkopf on first thing on a Monday morning to remind us of the gravity of the situation, right? So has J.D. Vance gone or not gone to Pakistan?
He didn't call me. Today, I mean,
Well,
he
Trump said he'd sent him. Trump said he'd sent
think,
him, and then J.D. Vance's office or someone said, well, J.D. Vance is still here. He hasn't left yet.
Well, that's because several people said he was going and leading the delegation, and then the president said, no, he's not going. Then there was some back and forth. For a while over the weekend, the Pakistanis were like shutting roads and doing all this super, security stuff because they thought maybe Trump was going but Trump's not going to go there. First of all, he may never go there. But if Trump goes, he would only go if there was a deal that he could then say, wins him the Nobel Peace Prize, right? For ending war he started. But I don't know whether J.D. Vance is going. And also, to be honest with you, I think we all know it will make zero difference. J.D. Vance is not a negotiator. He doesn't understand what's going on. Neither does Steve Witkoff. Neither does Jared Kushner. They don't know anything about nuclear enrichment. They don't know anything about the history of deals with Iran. They don't know anything about most of the secondary issues that have to do with the Middle East. John Bolton is right. They'd be better off if Marco Rubio went and led the delegation. He knows a little bit about this stuff. But Rubio has demonstrated he has absolutely no character whatsoever and will do whatever Trump wants. And whatever Trump wants is what makes Trump look good. Whereas typically in a negotiation, what you're trying to do is advance U.S. national interest. And that's the one thing whoever's negotiating is not going to be advancing U.S. national interests. They're going to be advancing Donald Trump's personal PR agenda.
But as interesting as the Wall Street Journal piece over the weekend that Trump had to be led out of the briefing room because he was just screaming and shouting too much and he really couldn't handle the heat, as they say, was a piece in The Atlantic which said that, according to multiple sources, Kash Patel is drinking on the job. And there was one particular occasion where they couldn't rouse him and they had to actually, I think, use a battering ram to take down the door. This is not a laughing matter. He has announced that he's going to sue, and he needs to sue today to keep any credibility. So I know you've been talking to people in the intelligence services about what they think of him. Do tell.
Well, I've been talking to people in the FBI about this, and former FBI agents, people who themselves have been talking to current FBI agents. And when it comes to Kash Patel, there are kind of three words that come to mind. One is they're disgusted. They're disgusted by his behavior. He is debasing the FBI. It's a place that has a lot of pride in its reputation. It is one of the most if you're in the CIA, you think the FBI is kind of the B team. That's a old Washington thing. But the FBI, buttoned down, in love with procedure, more military than the military in some respects, and to have a crazed mess like Kash Patel has disgusted them. The consequence of that is that he is also despised. I've never seen an official, senior in a big organization like that, who, when I talk to people, the response is, I hate this guy. I loathe him. I loathe what he stands for.
Well, it's not even clear what he does stand for other than parading around in an FBI outfit. I mean, one of the accusations against him is that he closed down the FBI shop so he could shop in peace on his own, buying all the equipment, which it's really odd. I mean, it would be like Bruce Springsteen wearing a Bruce Springsteen tour T-shirt. I mean, it's just so weird and strangely
or like me wearing
uncool.
a BB.
I love your T-shirt. I was going to come on to your T-shirt because that deserves a whole segment on its own.
Okay, well, that's fine, but I think that that's right. That he's behaving in an erratic way. He has. Whenever he's gotten involved in an investigation, remember back in Charlie Kirk and so forth, he's screwed it up. He's made it worse.
Well, the accusation there is he was drunk, which might be one of the reasons
that was
why.
one of the accusations. He also flew there and inserted himself into a criminal investigation process and shifted all the focus to himself and away from what should have been done. He's flying his girlfriend around on planes and giving her a security detail because I think it makes her feel good or makes him feel good about himself or whatever it is. But that gets us to the third word because he is that people are disgusted by him. They despise him. But I think the most important thing is they think he's dangerous. This is the guy who shut down the process, the part of the FBI that was tracking Iranian terrorists in the United States right before we attacked Iran. They've shut down a lot of the counterintelligence efforts against the Russians. They have shut down a lot of the efforts targeting white-collar crime in the United States in order to focus, their efforts on doing what he has said he's going to do this week, and that is prosecuting Trump's enemies in made-up cases. Now, those are going to fall apart in court. But what's going to fall apart in court before those made-up cases, to go back to your very first question? Mm-hmm. This lawsuit against the Atlantic. Because if he files it, and I doubt he'll file it, then he will do what he has done with other lawsuits. He filed my friend Olivia Troy, who's former Trump official who's now running for Congress in Virginia. He filed a suit against her, but for defaming him. But here's the problem: if there is a lawsuit, there will be discovery. Mm-hmm. Kash Patel does not want to sit down under oath and answer questions from the lawyers for the Atlantic about, is he drunk? Has he been drunk? Does he misallocate funds? Does he use FBI resources for his girlfriend? Where was he on this day? Where was he on that day? Did he shut this down? Was he incommunicado? Has he been using insecure devices to communicate, et cetera? He doesn't want that to happen, because then he has two choices. He lies, commits perjury, goes to jail, or alternatively, he admits bad things. And, they could also ask him questions about, well, did the president approve this? Did the president approve that? And once Trump thinks Kash Patel is a threat to him, and I suspect, I think that's the real big story here. Once Trump thinks Kash Patel is a threat, Kash Patel's gone, and somebody's going to call him up and say, hey, Kash, stay in line. You don't want to cross the president. He gets made the head of some foreign board like Kristi Noem to keep him quiet.
Another shield for the Americas.
Well, exactly. Some kind of bullshit like that. Will Kash Patel survive this? That was your hidden question.
Yes,
what do you think the answer is?
No, I think he doesn't. I think that, the piece referenced the fact, which I think we already knew actually, that Trump had yelled at him after he was giddily quaffing beer in Italy at the finals of the men's Olympic hockey game. And he seemed pretty out of control then. And apparently Trump had reamed him out. Because actually, for all of Trump's issues, he doesn't appear to drink. He had an older brother who was an alcoholic, and he doesn't like scenes of people being out of control with alcohol. Out of control in other words, but not with alcohol. You would have thought that this would have come up in Kash Patel's own background check, but perhaps that was just ignored.
Well, first of all, they dispensed with a lot of background checks in hiring these people. Secondly, you're absolutely right. Trump hates people who are drunks, including in this particular case that you mentioned, his brother. And I think Kash Patel's a dead man walking. He will be out of there, and he will be out of there fairly soon.
Well, the piece in The Atlantic also opens with the delightful anecdote that he's trying to get into his computer and he can't get into it. A little bit like you this morning trying to get into our link and you were having technical problems. We all know how frustrating that is, but he then became convinced that he'd been fired and already taken out of the system, whereas you had not been fired, you were just having technical problems. But he's so paranoid already.
That's very reassuring.
He's so paranoid already that he's vulnerable to losing his job. It's just that Kristi Noem turned out to be more vulnerable, and so did Pam Bondi. But clearly, he may well be next in line.
Yeah, well, look, and also Trump has a tendency to take it out on women. He doesn't like standing up to men. It makes him, uncomfortable because he's a weakling. He's a very little man. But Kash Patel is done. Trump's big problem, and I'm sure Susie Wiles trying to figure this out, is how do you fire Kash Patel, who you gotta fire, RFK Jr., who you gotta fire, the Secretary of Labor, who's got all sorts of scandals going on over there, who you gotta fire, and not make it look like the wheels are coming off the bus.
But David, in other countries, I mean, certainly in the UK, they used to do a sort of I was going to say midterm, but they used to do a sort of reshuffle. It was called the reshuffle, where you would get rid of ministers, you would move ministers into different portfolios. I mean, there's no reason why he couldn't do that. What looks terrible is the drip, 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 drip of one firing a month.
Well, look, I think you should call Susie Weil and give her that advice. But I think the reality is, Susie Weil was getting credit as chief of staff for not having the kind of turnover that Trump had in his first term, and for sort of keeping a lid on all of this. But she's just gotten to the point of no return. When you've got this article in The Atlantic and you've got Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance in a pissing match with the Pope, and then got RFK Jr. with the raccoon penis story and the new book. And, you would have thought somewhere along the way, maybe the measles epidemic or, getting in trouble with, the scientific community, or my favorite RFK Jr. anecdote is the time he said he's not afraid of germs because when he was a heroin addict, he snorted coke off of a toilet seat.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, okay, now going back to work. Hi, Secretary of Health and Human Services here after, all that. Anyway, the point is they got to go. And Trump knows they got to go, and Susie Weil knows they've got to go. And a bunch of Republicans running for Congress are like, well, maybe that'll distract and maybe it'll look like they've got their act together. And I'm going to give you just a little tiny weensy bit of hope in that. And that is last week, they appointed a head of the CDC who is a woman who actually is a public health professional.
Erica Schwartz.
Was actually a former surgeon, a deputy surgeon general, who is respected in the field, and who is a woman of color, who is the least Trumpy nomination they've made anywhere, and is a good pick. And you want to know something? To me, that's a sign that they're running scared. They were picking the worst people they could to say, hey, we can pick the worst people we can. And now it's blowing up in their face. And they're just saying, oh, God, we just don't need the headaches. Let's get a professional in here and stop having these conversations. Of course, they still have the FEMA dude who was transported to the Waffle House and can't stop talking about it.
Well, teleported, not just transported. It was teleported.
Yes, you're right. It was teleported to a Waffle House. And we're like, here we are. We're like, 35 minutes into this podcast. And it's like, oh, yeah, there's also the dude at FEMA who was teleported to a Waffle House after the Secretary of Health and Human Services cut the penis off of a raccoon, after the Vice President of the United States started lecturing the Pope about theology after Pete Hegseth released battle plans on his telephone. I mean, it's like, oh my God, truly a
Well,
golden age of chaos.
I loved your column on RFK Jr. cutting off the penis of the raccoon that he'd found at the side of the road. Or I think
I
he
love
might.
the way, please say that again. I love the way that you said raccoon.
Oh, raccoon. It's like the Strait of
Raccoon.
Hormuz. Two new words that have come leaping. Well, I guess raccoon's not new, but two words
No.
that have suddenly become prominent in the last week. And apparently, I asked Isabel Vincent, the author of the book on RFK Jr., what he did with it. And she said he thought he put it in the freezer. And I could only think about the nanny, coming home after school one day, trying to manage all 4 children and thinking, what are we going to have for supper tonight? And rooting around in the freezer and thinking, well, I could roast this and perhaps that would add some flavor.
What's for dinner tonight, Dad? Oh, Vienna sausages, kids.
I think it wouldn't be big enough to I imagine.
Well, that's why I said Vienna sausages. They're
Right,
very
okay,
small.
very, very small. Well, clearly it wouldn't be enough to feed a family of 4, but I do think that people are very concerned they can't get vaccinations. And it seems clear that Erica Schwartz, who they brought in to run the CDC, is actually a doctor who believes in vaccines. So I can't even believe we say that because it's such a remarkable thing to say, but here we are, we're 2026 and we need someone at the CDC who believes in vaccines.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. So here you have RFK Jr. driving down the road in a van with his kids, and he goes, oh, I'm going to pull over. There's a raccoon there. Hey, kids, I'm going to cut the penis off the raccoon. Isn't that interesting? A family activity. And then I'm going to bring it home, and we can study it later. Won't that be fun, kids? And the kids are in the back going, I can't wait till I get to college, right? Because anybody would know that this is nuts. But here's the weird thing. This is the 3rd roadkill story we have for RFK Jr., right? RFK Jr. took the dead baby bear and put it in Central Park. He took he cut off a head of a whale and tied it to his car. This guy's fucking, and we knew he was a heroin addict, right? It's not just, he's doing all these crazy things as Secretary of Health and Human Services. He does them. And there's always something crazier he did. I mean,
I'm sure we haven't got to half the crazy yet. But the craziest thing he did was actually manage to persuade Donald Trump to give him the Health and Human Services portfolio. That's what's extraordinary.
And honestly, that was the punchline of my piece.
Oh,
the punchline of my piece was, we've got all this craziness happening every single day. Each of the stories we just talked about. But the real problem is that the president of the United States is oblivious to this stuff. And he is acting crazier every day in ways that have terrified the people around him. See the Wall Street Journal story about the military. And he's growing more erratic. He can't control himself. He uses bad language all the time in public. He can't stay focused on a conversation for any period of time. He doesn't remember people's names. He snaps his fingers to have reporters pulled out of his press briefings. He is going deeper and deeper into the abyss of mental illness every single day. And that overshadows the nuttiness of everybody else by a lot, because Donald Trump is the sole individual capable of launching the over 5,000 nuclear warheads in the American arsenal at his whim.
Do you think at that point, though, that
4 minutes after he gives the order, not some long process, 4 minutes after he gives the order, the missiles are out of their silos. And this man is losing his mind in front of our very eyes. And, people are not taking his growing mental illness seriously enough.
So the other thing, I think that when you have someone like that in charge, everybody is paranoid, right? They're paranoid because he is behaving like a dictator, and it is that thing, and I think you've mentioned it once, don't be the first person to stop clapping Stalin. So all the people around Donald Trump are feeling anxious. We've talked about Kash Patel. What are you hearing about Pete Hegseth? Because he's now in a battle with the army secretary. He fired the army chief of staff, a 4-star general, Randy George, because he thought he was leaking about him. He thinks the army secretary is leaking about him too, which is always that sign of great paranoia. But the army secretary is apparently a great friend of J.D. Vance. They went to Yale Law School together, so he's somehow protected. What are you hearing from your sources?
What I've heard is, again, the feedback from senior military officers, former military officers, people close to the Pentagon, reporters in the Pentagon, is that the level of contempt for Hegseth is off the chart. That virtually nobody respects Hegseth. They're in the military. They're trained to respect the office, to follow the chain of command, to do their duty, and they're doing that. But they're an increasing number, and this Wall Street Journal story is a good example of that. But there are others, people, pushing back on the attacks on boats in the Caribbean, and the commander of Southcom ultimately being forced out because he pushed back on it. The Army Chief of Staff pushing back. These are all signs, and they're very unusual developments. And these are all signs that the military is sort of had it with Hegseth, and they're starting to stand up to him on a regular basis. And honestly, that started even back, remember, during the Quantico thing where he said we're going to have no more fatties in the military and no more beards and stuff. And he had summoned all these people from all around the world to give them what amounted to a high school football team pep talk. And it was demeaning and debasing for them, and it was a waste of money, and they knew it. So, Hegseth within the building is easily the most despised Secretary of Defense ever. The question is how long he lasts and when Trump can get rid of him. And, it was one thing to fire the Army Chief of Staff in the middle of a war. That's extraordinary. You don't do that typically. I think it is unlikely that Trump will fire Hegseth in the middle of this Iran conflict, simply because it would look so terrible. And also because Hegseth is one of the few people who's out there defending the president's decisions with regard to this war. The question is whether Hegseth's real purpose isn't that, and that he still hasn't fulfilled his real purpose, and that is the willingness to deploy troops in American cities during an election. And he has already shown he's willing to deploy the National Guard into U.S. cities. And I think that's the reason he was hired, because the first time around, people like General Milley and General Mattis said no when Trump suggested doing that. And if Trump sees the election as an existential threat, that he's going to get impeached, that he's going to get convicted, or that it's the end of his relevance as a president and thus as a man and thus as a human, and he thinks Hegseth is a useful tool in achieving that because he will actually do the dirty deed with regard to disrupting the elections, then Hegseth, might have some value, might remain around. But I would be very, very surprised if Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense in January of 2027. So the question for me is now or later.
So maybe actually what they're talking about at Susie Wiles' offsite is, can we send troops into American cities to try and make sure that we win the election?
Well, they may not be talking about that. There's certainly, there is this woman in the Justice Department who's now pushing the state of Michigan to give up their voter rolls. They've gotten 2 other states to do it. There are a bunch of other states that are pushing back. There is no reason for them to have the voter rolls. The federal government does not have a role to play in election management. The only reason to get the voter rolls is to intimidate voters into not voting, and possibly to help the immigration efforts of DHS, also inappropriate use of voter rolls. But that is a sign, just like Tulsi Gabbard, going down to Georgia to help with the same kind of attack, a task, that manipulating the elections, doing everything they could to put their thumb on the scales is a top priority. And I think you're right. I mean, I think, what is our election strategy is something they're talking about a lot. And what they mean by strategy is how can we cheat and get away with it?
Well, and also, I'm sure that Trump was mindful of what happened to Viktor Orban in Hungary, despite J.D. Vance having gone out and lent his shoulder to the wheel of Orban's campaign. And you could think that perhaps Trump was looking at it and thinking, well, why didn't they just fudge the election? And looking back on January the 6th, it all makes a bit more sense now.
Well, I mean, it always made sense to people who knew Trump was willing to cheat. It always made sense if you thought during the 2016 election cycle, he actually was reaching out to the Russians and the Russians were helping him cheat. The problem is this, and Orban ran into the problem. It's easy to cheat a little. It's easy to move the needle a little. It's hard to move it a lot. And what Orban came up against was the highest voter turnout in Hungarian history, 75% voter turnout, in a landslide against him. And all the sort of little levers he had in place didn't work. We've seen that before. In Mexico, the main party there, controlled Mexico for 75 years. And they did it by a little manipulation of these elections. And then Vicente Fox ran, and he won by more than the 2 to 3% margin that the PRI knew they could fix. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's the thing. The whole secret to the 2026 elections in the U.S. and the 2028 elections is that those people who oppose Trump have got to go out, they've got to vote, they've got to get their friends to vote, they've got to be active, they've got to donate, and they've got to make it a wave election. Because if it is not a wave election, if it is a close election, then Trump will drag it into court. He will find a few places where there are pressure points. He will get certain people disqualified. Certain of his judges will do what they're supposed to do. And the result of the election being thrown into chaos like that will be, the possibility that they could change the result. It can't be close. If there is one message Americans got to take away, is if you think Trump is dangerous, and he's nuts, and he is dangerous, if you think Trump is dangerous, he's got to lose by a lot, MAGA's got to lose by a lot, or they will steal it.
Well, and the Democrats have to put up candidates that people want to leave their homes for instead of just sitting on the couch and thinking, well, I'm going to sit it out.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And I think when you look at candidates, it can't be a candidate who says I'm a change candidate who doesn't look like change or who doesn't feel like change. It can't be a candidate who looks like change but doesn't sound like change. Kamala Harris would have been a very different kind of president from anyone we ever had. But she made the mistake of sounding too much like Joe Biden, too much like the establishment. You've actually you got to have candidates who appear to be the change you want to see. Barack Obama was a candidate like that. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump was a candidate like that. Mm-hmm. Zoran Mamdani is a candidate like that. But they don't have to say, hey, I'm different. They appear to be different. You believe they're different. And if they then say, as a Democrat, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to fight, and you believe they will be effective, and that's the other hard part of this, then you're going to get a result like Peter Magyar did in Hungary. Because he said, look, I'm for a few things. I'm for Europe, I'm for NATO, I'm for democracy, and I'm anti-corruption, and I'm going to hold these guys accountable. It was a simple message. People believed him, and he was a candidate like that. And that's what Democrats ought to be looking for right now.
Right. Where is Peter Magyar in the US? All right, David. Well, we will monitor the situation. We'll monitor the situation in Hungary and how fast he moves on the corruption front. And we will monitor who is emerging as a Democratic candidate over the next year or so. And of course, we'll be monitoring Kash Patel. Where is his lawsuit? And how long do we think he'll be in the job? I'm sure there are a lot of people on Kalshi and Polymarket right now betting against him.
Yeah, if you're on Polymarket, and of course we are not in the business of providing investment advice, so don't listen to it for that purpose. But if you're on Polymarket, bet that there will be some kind of papered over solution for this war sooner rather than later. Bet Kash Patel is a short timer. And bet that Donald Trump's mental capacity will continue to diminish.
Okay, you can take those straight to the betting office. And you can...
Yeah, but what about my T-shirt? I had this made.
I love your T-shirt. David, you might have to stand up a bit because your name it's excellent. Be Beast. Well, you are a beast, David. You're a beast for the Daily Beast. Every Monday evening, we will be bringing your opinions to the Beast audience.
These aren't opinions. These are facts.
Well, they are. What is the... There should be a word, a sort of factinian. It's a factinian.
It's a fact onion, yeah. It's a nice, it sounds like a snack. Yes, look.
Layer upon layer, David. We're just peeling back the layers.
This is, to me, the launch pad of my week is talking to you. It gets me going and provides the energy I need to get away all the way to the weekend. I hope it does for everybody else.
I hope it does too. All right, send us your comments, people. We love to read them. A lot of people out there, David, are very fond of you and excited to hear from you.
Well, let me add one thing then, because last week I try to be right about everything. I just said facts. I was wrong about something last week, and I feel bad about it. But we were talking about vice presidents and did anybody ever replace a vice president in midterm? And I said something to the effect of, yeah, well, what about, Nelson Rockefeller in the middle of Nixon's term? Well, of course, Nelson Rockefeller was not the vice president to Nixon. He was the vice president to Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was the vice president
to Nixon,
who replaced Spiro Agnew in the Nixon administration. And I, if we're going to have a reputation for facts here, I want to make sure that when we make a mistake, we correct it.
Yeah, well, and also what was interesting was how many people wrote in to let us know, because people don't want a podcast with mistakes, and we want to correct our mistakes. So if we've made more today, you can let us know, although I don't think we've made any mistakes judging the character of Kash Patel or indeed Pete Hegseth. Do you want to take back anything you said about either of them, David?
No, I actually held back today. But I think we want to try to be right all the time. And we're going to, right now we're kind of like Ivory Soap used to be 99 and 44 100% pure.
Okay, well, if we've made mistakes, feel free to point them out. We're always happy to correct them. And we love reading your comments. I've got several favourite parts of this conversation, David. Your rant about the president's mental health, I think, is a really important one. And so, too, is what people say about Kash Patel, that they're disgusted by him. He's despised. And more importantly than either of those, he's dangerous. Anyway, a note to start the week on. And David, we'll look forward to seeing you next Monday.
Anytime. I really love it. And I enjoy the conversation. So I'll see you next week.
Great. And don't forget, be beast.
Be beast.
I love talking to David Rothkopf. He makes me feel sane in an insane world. Tell us what you think. Don't forget to fill the comments with your thoughts and your observations and who you would like to see replace Kash Patel at the FBI. And just a reminder, please press the subscription button. We love your support. It's the reason we can bring you these independent and frankly fearless conversations about the off-the-wallness of this government. And don't forget, as our First Lady would have us all be beast. So the good news is we have so many beast tier members now. There are too many names to read out, and we really appreciate your support. Thanks to our production team, Devon Rogerino, Ryan Murray, Rachel Passer, Heather Passaro, Neil Rosenhaus.